а затем мы уже перейдем к более современным темам. Вот. Ну и поскольку у нас есть уже план, да, список выступающих, позвольте представить участникам круглого стола старшего преподавателя кафедры теории и истории юридического факультета Московского гуманитарного университета, кандидата юридических наук Окуневу Марину Олеговну. Вот. Ну, я думаю, Марина Олеговна сама назовет, да, тему своего выступления. Вот. Пожалуйста, Марина Олеговна.
Добрый день, уважаемые участники круглого стола. Тема моего выступления звучит как пятилетний перспективный план освоения и исследования арктического сектора владений СССР. С вашего позволения, сейчас я запущу презентацию. Так. Собственно, тема моя здесь еще раз на экране, и я хотела бы рассказать о действительно том плане научно-исследовательских работ, который впервые был составлен в советском государстве при переходе уже к плановой экономике и плановому освоению Арктики. Интересно здесь то, что для СССР планирование научно-исследовательской деятельности, планирование научно-исследовательских работ – это было такое общее место, это была такая база, на которой советская наука должна была строиться изначально. Об этом говорили и писали еще в начале 20-х годов, и создавались здесь различные также комитеты и комиссии по изучению естественных производительных сил России при Госплане, и об этом же говорил и на это же указывал Рабкрин, когда проводил проверку научно-технического отдела ВСНХ. То есть вот эта вот плановость, вот это обязательное планирование и обязательная увязка с экономикой, с развитием народного хозяйства, научно-исследовательских работ, это была такая характерная черта советской науки практически вот с момента возникновения советского государства, с момента, когда советское государство в принципе смогло уделить внимание развитию науки. И, конечно, изучение исследования Севера, изучение исследования Арктики не стало здесь исключением, хотя здесь несколько, может быть, запозднились по сравнению с другими работами. Если комиссия по изучению естественных производительных сил страны – это 23-й примерно год, то та комиссия, о которой сегодня буду говорить я, правительственная арктическая комиссия, она создается только в июле 28 года. Она создается постановлением Совнаркома СССР, постановление об усилении научно-исследовательской работы, научно-исследовательской деятельности в арктических владениях Союза СССР. И здесь комиссия создается действительно для проработки того...
was created to work on that 5-year plan, that to create the commission to be created as Совнарком decided it. And besides this, we have to mention that there was no foundations that could become the basis for this first 5-year plan. And the plan was only drafted by the early 1930s, and it was submitted for consideration. So the 5-year plan number 2 factually was created later than it was actually implemented. And the commissions had very ambitious plans. And what were the key contents of these 5-year plans? In the introductory part, they described the tasks that were standing before the commissions and before the country. And here, despite the Arctic was crucial for Russia, but it was very under-investigated. So what was the main task? To study and to inventorize the northern extremities of Russia. Again, every scientific effort should have been planned. And for the second 5-year plan, the Arctic was to be included into the overall plan for economic development, and they wanted to get at least something out of the Arctic. So one of the specific features of Soviet times was linking to practice, linking science to practice, because science for science was not very characteristic for Soviet planned economy, although Soviet Union was supposed to become the leader. And of course, the scientific priority was supposed to still be there. And the plan was constructed in such a way that it listed the drawbacks existing at the moment of the plan composition, and which the plan was intended to overcome, and also the plans for future. A plan was a kind of a directive, an instruction for individual plans of scientific institutions, but at the time of the composition of this plan by 1930, there was no special assigned institution for which the Arctic studies would be key domain. Many organizations were engaged in this work, and their main tasks were totally different, and they were underfunded, which of course led to problems such as very narrow projects, and mainly concentrated in the western part of Russia. And they were aimed mainly on practical tasks. And the Commission suggested to establish a central steering body and call it the Central Arctic Institute, with 3 sectors: Central, Western, and Eastern. And there were to be stations and laboratories established under it, and actually it was established. The goals in the plan had to do with analyzing the existing data and with expansion of studies, focusing in Central and Eastern Arctic, providing navigation for planes and ships, fisheries. Of course, everything was supposed to include a reporting, like exhibitions, etc. And all the works were divided into 6 groups. First group, a group of works, the basis of materials, studying the accumulated materials, publishing the studies that were not published yet, and building a general plan, including the issue of type of marine vessel for Arctic navigation. The second group of works was the research itself, expeditions, marine studies, human studies, acclimatization, transportation and communication, and using the opportunities that existed, provide scientific terms of reference for every ship, for every expedition, trying to use everything at hand, everything available. The results from stations had to be collected and systematized. So those tasks were quite global. Possibilities of acclimatization and colonization of the Arctic. Third group of works, works with meteorological and hydrological observations, international cooperation. On the one hand, here you could organize an international polar year, which was done, and a transatlantic Zeppelin flight. That's the Air Arctic International Society project. USSR was supposed to be a part of it. And then there is a specific group of works related with navigation of sea vessels, ships, and planes. A network of air bases was supposed to be created, also increasing the number of commercial vessels. So the research was to be very practical. And the fifth group is the agricultural development of the Arctic. First of all, it's fisheries and using the available natural resources. And group number 6, that is industry. Providing scientific support to new processing methods, for example. And then there was the concluding part of the 5-year plan. It was about the general issues of developing transportation, about colonization of the Arctic, using electric power supply. And the plan itself stated that not everything was included in that plan because of limited funds. And it said that further steps should be included in further plans. So it was implemented partially to some point. So this plan, prepared by the Commission, resulted in the, first of all, the Arctic Institute declared, and the commission was disassembled in 1933, exactly due to establishment of All-Union Arctic Institute and Northern Sea Route. So new agencies overtook the authorities of this commission. I think that will be it from me. Dear participants, I am ready to answer your questions. Thank you, Marina. So if the participants have questions, it's a round table, so we can discuss to spend some time for question and answers. I will present you right now Rum Ushnitsky, the Dean of the Law School of Northeastern Federal University, candidate of Sciences, and our colleague. As scientists, we would like to hear something about legal science, about law. So was law also included in that plan? No, and probably it's not a coincidence, because law is a kind of a secondary in relation to economics or industry. At that moment, I believe it was too early to speak about developing legal sciences. The state was quite limited in its resources. The period we're talking about, was the first period, it was the first stage. So there was no possibility for legal sciences to somehow be included in that plan. But we will see that later, when they tried to include these territories into economy, into agriculture. But law was not in the focus of that commission. Okay, thank you. And you mentioned that later they overall, were there any legal studies in the Arctic? As far as I know, there were almost no such legal studies in the Arctic. Yes, you are right. Professor Mikhail Fedorov probably could be one to mention, but nobody other than that. So maybe if we continue our research, maybe we will find something. But we will ask about it from an expert for legal education problems. Our next speaker is the chair of the Department of State and Law from Omsk State University, Yana Yishuk. And the name of her presentation is Legal Politics
в единое образовательное и научное пространство. Татьяна Федоровна, вы нас слышите?
Да, я вас отлично слышу.
Здравствуйте, Татьяна Федоровна.
Здравствуйте.
Рада вас видеть.
Меня слышно, да, как я понимаю?
Everybody can hear me well?
Вы меня слышите?
Слышно, хорошо.
Хорошо, да? Спасибо большое за
Thank you very much
участие в вашем
for your invitation to participate in your event.
в Сибири, хотя
We're located in Siberia too, even though it's not Arctic, but the problem of the united space of educational scientific space is close to my theme. And I want to thank Olga Dmitrievna for inviting me, that we discussed in Moscow about this roundtable, and I'm with joy participating in it. And when we talk about the law practice of in the scientific field, so this I would like to pay some more attention in this topic about the researches the researches that were done in Yakutia. In my presentation, this was a little bit different. So in law field, we can go through some position that we can talk about it. How does it realize it? So let's talk about the strategy of principle of the vector of the law field. It can involve into complexity. So it's like the complex programs of the plans that were dedicated to all the spheres of the lifestyle. So we cannot ignore the territorial binding that is dedicated to one separate territory. It was in the Soviet history and still holds up today. And we have one main, and there is one main goal. And the end goal of the Soviet system was to unite the whole Arctic into one system, into the socio-economical and educational sphere. And there was some separate sub-goals, was to get the territory straight, not only to get the Soviet name on it, that was not really hard, even though there was some international collision on this topic. But it was important to include this zone to the United States. I would like to share some facts on this avant-garde role of science, of scientific activity on Arctic territory. So 1949, creation of the Polar Soviet Station. It was so Makusevich, the head of this expedition, creation of this polar station. It will be helpful into the factor of its independence. So,
научных учреждений при Совнаркоме СССР, он писал следующее. Писал о необходимости закрепления на территории.
It was important to get this territory straight because if it would be bad for us in the future. So the united thinking on this topic through some different researchers. So this territory could, even though it's distant, almost unexplored in agricultural field, but it was one of the goals because of it. So this way, this logic of it was not only not science going after the expedition. It was the science was the avant-garde movement in building the governmental structure there. So the realization of them plans, the main goal was to include this territory in the government as a whole. And it was the discipline. First of all, was a unification, in which started in 1920. was using the same model of the territorial model, and we can see it's still working. That the territories still are separated with inside counties. The first option of it, which was started in 1930s, was creating in the middle ground between government and them territories. So this middle ground was pretty much lived. It was only in the Soviet time in 20s, 30s, but uh, they had some pro prolonged activity. They were lived at least till the end of the USSR collapse. So in 1925 there was another region unlocked, it was Keremiansky Okrug. So later when was they tried to see about new ways of life, so this kind of form of life was effective. So next, for the in labor field, it was the new state standards were kind of different. So in field that it was realized in. So let me get an example. First of all, is a specialized scientific building, Institute of Northern of North, that was established in the early 90s, 90, 90, and they were researching about the recommendation how to get the life straight in the north. And the second example is the agricultural reform. It was called Committee of the Northern Sea Way, and it was based in Novosibirsk. It was not far away from us. It was registered, not based, excuse me. And then it was reorganized in Northern Sea Way. So, but actually, it was this building institute was unique. It was it had a role of because it had there was and bases where the research equipment was in.
Далее, говоря о тех формах, которые более непосредственно имели отношение к науке, уважаемые коллеги, у меня картинка пропала. Но вроде все нормально, да?
We have some technical difficulties. That it was stationary basis. In 1927, the committee of the research of the North was created. Then the first one was another one, and then later expedition was organized, which also was collecting in most of the empirical material just to present it. And after that, a lot of just so we can start new research on this field. So identical researches were based on other regions too. And after the which was
следующая более стационарная научная форма организации науки, это уже базы, создана на Хибинах в 1934 году,
in
другая
19
была создана в 1936 году в городе Архангельске. Но, тем не менее, вот в последующем, вот этот советский период, где-то
so after pre-war, after war, there was still development time in the Arctic zone, where the location territory was dominating most of the time because though it was connected, there was some difficulties with the weather and climate. And in 1960, as a result of these researches that were held mostly by the NOS, it was the tour through the Siberian rivers. We needed to transform into the new model of the development and whole sociality. It's coming to stationary development. So this territory collected enough potential to recreate the needful forms in different spheres, especially in educational scientific. Even though the first universities were started to open in 1930s, but mostly there was starting to education started transform in 1950 into the like evening schools and colleges. So even started to go into the actual universities, and they started to create new educational personnel that really gave a good impact into the economical sphere. So through the different vectors, especially in the law field, it was achieved uh, the united space of education and science. And it was the first brick to build the modern system. So, and even to this day, there was even a term of the new territory of exploration, and there was a lot of new concepts on this territory. And the sub-Arctic zone term came into place, which actually discovers new possibilities in researches in the really far Arctic zone. And right now, the Russian Federation into the Arctic, the geopolitical situation in the world changed. So we already seeing the new potential of education and everything else. I want to thank one more time to participate in this discussion, and I will be disconnected right now, but I'll be back soon. Thank you so much for the information. We learned a lot. So before that, it was said before that international law problems was mostly involved with the Arctic zone. So the Arctic is not only a zone with a lot of economical problems development, but first of all, it's a territory about the safety. So we presented the next speaker. Armashova Alla Vladimirovna, who is the PhD in the science field, in the jurisdiction field, Moscow Unitarian University. So you're gonna tell your theme yourself.
Thank you, and I thank everyone who gave us this opportunity to use this platform. And I would like to tell you about international legal problems in the Arctic and their solution in the Soviet Union in 1920s and 30s. The importance of international scientific cooperation in the Arctic and involvement as many researchers as possible from around the world was already relevant by in 1870s. But such cooperation was possible only when the leading countries would decide to cooperate without any competition, as was worded by one of the scientists. And when the competition in the 20th century became very intense, Arctic became really a place of rivalry and competition, because some borders were still flexible, and a lot of problems were caused by different island territories and adjacent marine territories. The first document that addressed and outlined the status of islands in the Arctic Russia was the note of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs dating back to 1916, when it stated that all the islands should be included into Russian territory, with listing of already known lands and islands. And that was actually the milestone of the new era of exploration of that territory. But it didn't indicate to who the marine spaces belonged, including the sea shelf. The First World War really showed how crucial Arctic waterways were. And back then, it was used by the Allies to procure all the needed reserves, and northern waters were home for the Allied fleet, and there they fought the German pirate submarines, and a lot of human resources, military resources also were transported and based in the Arctic. Although that intervention was not successful, it was an experience for Russia in the Arctic, and then the Northern Fleet was established. And as per the peace treaty with Finland in 1920, the Pensama locality became the frontier, and Finland two wars following the decisions and aspirations to cause or to appropriate or to become the owner of the Arctic territories. Then Spitsbergen also became a shared territory. In 1925, Norway announced Spitsbergen a part of its territory, and further, step by step, it expanded its jurisdiction over it and the waters. Russia didn't take part in signing of Spitsbergen Pact. USSR joined it in 1935. The collapse of Russian Empire and the civil war that followed, the weak position of country affected national interests and the ability to protect them, including in the Arctic, but still Soviet country succeeded in protecting its Arctic areas. So at some point the policy of Soviet state changed, and they started focusing more on strengthening inner structure rather than provoking a world revolution. So they went back to the document of 1916, and based on it, the authorities in 1926, the USSR announced the territory of USSR, all the islands in the Arctic Ocean adjacent to Soviet territory, and some borders were established. And Arctic witnessed a lot of activities both in scientific, industrial and military domain. In the 1920s, Canada organized so-called Arctic Patrol, and in 1924 the Secretary of State for Marine Affairs announced an intent to include the North Pole into the territory of the US as continuation of Alaska, and they said that this huge unexplored territory was not supposed to become other countries' territory. The USSR also deployed a large-scale program of development of the Arctic in terms of exploration, scientific study, construction of infrastructure and fleet, and of course military domain. The Northern Sea Route, which started to be used during those times, also cannot be underestimated. But anyways, international expeditions also successfully worked in the Arctic. A Norwegian expedition to Novaya Zemlya. That expedition took a long time to prepare. There was a lot of communication between Norway and the USSR, and due to their long history of a border delineation, But finally, in 1921, Moscow officially gave the permission to undertake this expedition in the Soviet Arctic. And that year was the start of the civil war in Soviet Russia, and science was not in the focus. But still the expedition happened, and it's still considered to be one of the most significant ones to that archipelago. And after the return of this scientist back, the team was enlarged, and the materials collected were processed, and there was a whole 2 volumes of articles with publications on flora, fauna of Novaya Zemlya archipelago, the entire biota. But the main part of it had to do with geology. And another result of the expedition was that a map was drafted that reflected a very unusual picture, partial glaciation, and another map, more detailed, of one area. Other expeditions, significant ones, were in 1926 a plane expeditions of Amundsen and Noble to the North Pole. They just didn't want just to reach the North Pole, but to cross vast unexplored expanses between Spitsbergen and Alaska. In 1928, an expedition to the pole using a Zeppelin was organized under leadership of Italian scientist Umberto Nobile. The Zeppelin flew over North Pole, but on the way back it had an accident. A part of the crew perished. The rest stayed on the ice, in their campsite on the ice. And then the salvation party was organized, and the last members of that expedition was saved by a Soviet icebreaker. And another important project by Walter Bruce, German engineers were quite successful in creating Zeppelins that were huge. And they tried to find markets for these technologies, and again, led by Walter Bruns, they created International Society of Arctic Exploration Zeppelins. So he addressed the Soviet state and asked for permission to create a service based for the route from Amsterdam to Yokohama. And he offered, in exchange, he offered technologies for military Zeppelins, because back then they believed they would become useful for sea battles. Soviet officials also thought that Zeppelins could be used to supply goods to the north. So Bruns's suggestions were submitted in 1926 to the military officials of the USSR. Zeppelins were thought to be promising as military vehicles because when they were high enough, they were not accessible for land artillery or other planes. They were believed to be also useful for attacks. So the project was very carefully considered in the planning ministry of the USSR and was found to be not that efficient, but they were very interested in German technologies. And the plans were to build 2 Zeppelins in Soviet Union. However, the plan was to try it first in a smaller expedition in some of the northwestern archipelagos. And besides, it required a robust system of navigation. The project was postponed many times, but still cooperation continued between USSR and Germany. And German Zeppelin finally flew, Duke Zeppelin, from Archangel to Franz Joseph Land. Soviet state also built an own Zeppelin and tried transarctic flights. But, of course, meteorological conditions didn't allow these air vehicles to be efficient. Nevertheless, the data collected during these projects was useful for plane aviation later. I won't spend your time going into detail because I wanted to mention one other event. In 1932 to 1933, it was the second International Polar Year. And in that year, 44 countries participated with their scientists. And on the part of the Soviet Union, it was the Academy of Sciences and the Arctic Institute, headed by academician Schmidt. There was a lot of